Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Walter Van Koch, and I'm a program manager on the RSS platform and Internet Explorer. I've been with Microsoft for about 4 to 5 years, working on various products like MSN Messenger on the server side as well as the client. And today, I'm going to be talking about the RSS platform that we are shipping with the next version of IE, Internet Explorer 7. And when I talk about RSS or feeds or Atom, basically these are all the same to us. They're synonyms for each other. So whenever you hear me say RSS and you'd rather want to hear Atom or feeds, please do that translation for yourself. I'm not going to be picking one particular one, but basically I'm just using it as a general placeholder or name for the concept of a feed. You've heard a lot already about RSS. You've heard about the RSS platform before. You saw it in the keynote. You saw it in Dean Homakowicz's keynote. And I'm going to actually dig a little bit deeper in this talk about how to enable some of the functionality that you've seen before. And as you've heard, when we think about feeds, RSS, we're no longer thinking just about text. We're not thinking about just news and blogs, but actually what other content you can have in a feed, what can come down to the client's machine, how it can use it, and what you can do with it. In the first section of the talk, I'm going to talk about things that you've seen before, but I'm going to show you how it's actually what you can do today, how you can implement it today and use it. So how you can RSSify your site, how you can integrate into feed discovery, how you can enrich your feeds by using SLE, the simple list extensions that we've published under the Creative Commons license. So that's the same license as RSS 2.0, which means you can use it freely without having to worry about any licensing issues. As well, I'm going to be talking about lists, the concept, the difference between a feed and a list, as well as some of best practices when you are exposing and emitting feeds. Let me actually start with a demo. This is very similar to what you've already seen in Dean Homakowicz's demo. So this is just the front page of New York Times. And when you see front pages of a lot of different sites, you often try to find, is there actually a feed associated with a site? And you start hunting around, and you might be able to find some kind of link to feeds. But for a user, that is oftentimes fairly hard to find, and it's not readily clear, are there feeds associated with that site? And one of the things that IE7 has is feed discovery. So whenever there's a feed associated with a web page or with a website, you will find up here the feed discovery button. And it would light up and is basically orange instead of gray. And when you click on it, it automatically navigates to the feed and shows a preview or a rendering of what the user will get when they start subscribing to this feed. And we have a very easy link here to start subscribing to this feed. So now the users subscribe, the scheduled background sync engine will download the feed and look for new things, etc. Again, this is something you've seen before. Another type of feed that you've also seen before is the eBay feed here. And you can see some of the things that eBay has done is actually added tags according to the simple list extensions that allow the feed publisher to specify what content or what items or what fields inside a feed are actually interesting to sort by. So in this case, the buy now, current auction price, listing end time, etc. And what other properties are interesting to filter by. So for example, I want to only see the ones that have a buy now option for that auction, or things that are listed with PayPal for payment. So those are just a couple of things that the feed publisher decided. What is interesting? What should the user be able to do with a feed more than just showing it in a reverse chronological order? Another thing is that you've also seen this in the keynotes before, is the Amazon wishlist feed. So here, I just pulled up Jeff Bezos's wish list, which is publicly available. And here I click on the feed button for it. And again, this is coming down. Amazon decided to specify that the date added, price, sales rank are the interesting properties to sort by for a user, as well as filtering by the different stores that they have, for example, books, DVDs, kitchen equipment, software, etc. And on the right here, you see then how many items are of this particular, or that match that particular criteria. Another feed that has come up before is the Yahoo Music feed. So again here, interesting here is this is not just a feed. Because this is a top 10 list, it is actually a list. And that is the second part of the simple list extensions. Normally when you have a feed, the idea is you have a reverse chronological ordering of items. And whenever something falls off, your aggregator still keeps it around in the database, and all the new things are basically added to that store. The semantics for a list are slightly different. Here the idea is actually that the ordering is really important. Because really what's number one here is really what you care about to be number one. Even though, let's say, next week something else is number one. You don't want to have the old number one still show up. So in a list, what's important is ordering as well as making sure that you have the entire content set, so having all items that reflect the list. So now let me actually switch back and show you how some of these things are enabled. Like, what do you have to do on your side, what you can do today in order to make list discovery, simple list extensions happening. And fortunately, it's, like everything in RSS is supposed to be really, really simple. As well, the SLE, the simple list extensions, are quite simple as well. But let me start off with feed discovery. Feed discovery, how can you on your site tell the user, hey, there's a feed associated with it? What you do is you just add a link rel tag inside the head section of an HTML page. So in this scenario here is you see the hello world.xml has been added. This is the URL to the feed. You can give it a title. The type is the application/RSS plus XML or Atom plus XML if that's an Atom feed. And then you link rel alternative, that is just boilerplate text that you have to do in order for IE7 to pick up, this here is an associated feed. You can put more than just one link rel tag in here. You can have multiple link rel tags. And what happens then in IE7 is you have the little drop down and you see a whole listing of all the various feeds that are available and the user can choose from amongst them. So again, very, very simple. You can do that today. It's one line of HTML tag or one tag that you can add to your site in order to make it easier for your users to discover, hey, there's feeds associated with my site or with your site. Second part, simple list extensions. I showed you, and you've seen it before, sorting and ordering or grouping. And how is that enabled? Inside a feed, you basically, inside the channel tag, put a list info tag. And the list info tag has a couple of subtags like the sort and the group tags. And you can read it here. It's basically a very simple way of specifying, okay, what is the namespace, what is the name of the element that is interesting to sort or group by. And you can specify if it's a default sort order or not. And you give it the name that should show up inside the feed view, as you can see there on the right, as well as what is the data type. Is it, for example, a number? Is it a string? So that's important to know the way to sort by, etc. So again, very, very simple to program a feed for a user to make it more accessible for a user, to make it more interesting to interact with for a user. This is something you can do today. Very, very simple extra tags to add to your feeds and give users the extra capability. And the second part of the simple list extensions is the concept of a list that I just talked about. And this is equally trivial to add to existing feeds. So think about what kind of feeds or that you're already exposing or you're thinking about exposing that actually are more of the semantics of a list than a feed. And if it turns out to be a list semantic, all you have to do is add this one little tag inside the channel element in your feed that says, treat this feed as a list. And then the synchronization engine actually knows to be smart enough and handle it as a list. So replace all items and delete items that are no longer part of the list and maintain ordering. Very simple to do, things you can do today, one line of or one tag that you can add to your feed. Let me also talk about a couple of best practices. If you've written aggregators before or you've been somewhat familiar with RSS for quite a while and you've been consuming RSS, there are certain things that you've probably come across, that we've come across, that we would consider best practices in the sense of, oh, what are some of the things that I really should be doing when I'm emitting a feed to make it easier on the consumption side? One of the things is add the GUID tag on an item. It is our aggregators start using heuristics when they don't find the GUID tag. And the reason for why the GUID tag is good is it makes it much easier to notice for an aggregator what element is actually new, or what item is new. Do we already know about the item or not? Has it been updated? Without the GUID tag, there's heuristics you can use. You can try to use the link tag if it's a permanent link, but without it, it becomes less deterministic, and what happens is the user will see duplicates. Whenever a user sees duplicates, they're kind of feeling like this feed doesn't work quite right. So not only might it reflect poorly on the aggregator, it might actually reflect poorly on the feed itself. So if you add a GUID tag, very simple to add, please do so. The next thing is a pub date. A pub date is very good in order for an aggregator to actually show it in a correct sorting order. So if you want to have a reverse chronological order, that's always good to have. Another thing is a title. Whenever users, the way they consume feeds, they oftentimes just scan the titles in order to find certain entries or items that they're interested in reading. If there's no title, they will have to start looking at the description, and some descriptions in certain feeds actually have the full content, so they would have to step through the entire content to find which ones they want to read. Another thing is emit well-formed XML. That is sometimes not very easy to use and feed if it's not well-formed XML, because a lot of XML parsers don't really deal well with well-formed XML, non-well-formed XML. And at the end of the day is, as I said before, when I say RSS feeds and atoms, they're all synonyms for me. Choose a format whichever works best for you, but choose only one is kind of the guidance we want to give. It really doesn't matter. Most aggregators accept any kind of feed format anyway. It just confuses users when you ask the user to choose which feed format they want to use. And the more and more RSS and feeds go into the mainstream, users don't really care what format it is. Most of them don't really even care that it is RSS or Atom. They just want the content. They just want to have some way of having the subscribed semantic, being able to get new information. So choose a format and just use that. Don't choose two. So in the next part now of this talk, I'm going to be talking about the Windows RSS platform. So this is the RSS platform that's shipping with IE7 on XP as well as Vista. I'm going to be talking about the scheduled background download engine. This will be interesting for a lot of people that are hosting sites or feed publishers. What are you going to do when all of a sudden every user that runs IE has the ability to subscribe, and you all of a sudden have millions or hundreds of millions of users hitting your site? What are we doing in order to not bring down your site, or what you can do in order to help that your site doesn't get too many hits? Some of the security principles that we thought of when we originally designed the RSS platform. I will talk about the API object model and basically show a demo at the end. So what you see here is the architecture diagram to some degree of the RSS platform. At the bottom row, you see all various kinds of feeds with the different content types there. As I mentioned before, we don't think of RSS as just text, news and blogs, just text-based information. But there's a lot more information that you can send to the user, basically, and that the user will consume with various different applications beyond just a simple aggregator. So simple ones, blogs, photos, audio podcasting, you're probably familiar with that. Calendar, lists, there's a whole number of things that you can imagine adding to feeds, either as enclosures or via item extensions. On top of that is the download engine. What it does the frequent or on a schedule HTTP gets against the feed and downloads the feed, looks and identifies basically, okay, I have it here, I have the feed, gives it over to the parser that understands all the various formats, so RSS, 0.9x, 1.0, 2.0, and Atom, and then hands it over to the merge processor. The merge processor is the one that goes in and identifies, okay, do I already know about this particular item? Using the GUID tag. Do I have this already in my database? If yes, is it actually an updated item or not? If not, I'm going to ignore it. Or I have never seen this item before. Okay, let me actually add this new item to my store. Or in the case of lists, this is actually where the merge semantics for list are implemented to really be like, okay, conceptually, let me remove everything that I currently have in my store and put everything that I'm getting from this list into the store. Obviously, it's a little bit smarter than that. It just makes sure that the ordering is maintained and the complete set of items are there that are supposed to be there, and extra ones are being removed. So those are basically the lowest parts of the RSS stack that we've implemented. On top of that is you see the 3 different types of stores that there are. So one is the common feed list. This is where all the user subscriptions are maintained. And the reason why we call it the common feed list is because it's the user's data. It's the user's subscription list. It does not belong to one particular application. There are no hidden feeds. The user has always access to everything, to every feed that they're subscribed to. So they can say, I no longer want this feed, I want to unsubscribe. It's not particular to one application. Every application can use the object model, the API, in order to access the common feed list. Then there's the item store. That's where all the items are maintained, the contents of the item, as well as enclosures. So enclosures, if you're not familiar with that, think of them as email attachments. So each item can have an attachment or enclosure, which is just a regular file that basically can be downloaded. On top of that, to access things in those 3 stores is the object model, or API, and I will go a little bit deeper into that later. And on top of that, you see the various different applications, some of which we just listed here as browsers like IE7. IE7 is just like any other application. It does not have extra knowledge about the RSS platform. It uses the public APIs through and through. You can imagine photo applications that consume photo feeds and use the pictures to display them in a rich way, contact information, any other kind of application you can think of that wants to do something with the extra data that's coming down in feeds beyond just text. So that's kind of like the overview of the different building blocks of the RSS platform. But now let me talk about a little bit more about the download engine in the bottom left-hand corner, because that is probably for everyone here that's running a website or is thinking about running a website. It's one of those things like, well, yeah, I understand it's just a simple HTTP GET and then some XML parsing, right? That's all that RSS is. Well, if you've done this for a while, you will actually notice there is a little bit more to it. And what is it that you can do in order to help feed publishers to be able to give the users a good experience at the same time not getting hit with enormous bandwidth costs? So what we've done in the RSS platform is we implemented conditional gets and delta encoding. Conditional gets basically use the e-tag or if-since modified HTTP headers that are defined in HTTP to say, I'm making a request to the server. I'm going to ask, do you have any new information? Has this feed been updated since this particular token that I'm handing back? And so the site then can say like, oh, nope, there's nothing new, and basically just respond with content not modified. And so it's a very simple and quick exchange between the client and the server, not requiring the entire feed to be downloaded yet again. The delta encoding means if there actually is new information in that feed, the server can choose to just return all the items that are modified or new that basically the client has not seen before. So again, if your feed is very, really large because it has a lot of content in it, the server can decide, or you can decide on the server side, I'm just going to return all the new and updated items. Again, saving on bandwidth costs, essentially. gzip and those things, obviously, encoding are supported as well. The next thing is, this is basically once already the requests are being made. But what are we doing as well in the RSS platform is throttling the number of requests that we're doing. So in a sense is we're trying to conserve bandwidth also on the client side. So what we do here is we say we're not going to do more than 4 requests in parallel to various different servers. We're actually also not going to make requests in just a tight loop. But we're saying there can only be 1 additional request every second. So that kind of makes sure, because all of this happens in the background on the client side, the user might not be aware of anything really going on, and they want to be able to continue browse the web or download the email without much impact. So that's why we're throttling the number of requests and the number of requests in parallel that the RSS platform does. as well as what we're doing is salting the sync schedule. So this is again very interesting for the feed publisher side. Is the biggest worry is 9 a.m. Monday morning, everybody starts going to work, turning on their machine, oh my God, all of a sudden my site is going to go down because all the clocks on all computers are getting more and more synchronized. They're all going to exactly schedule at 9 a.m. 000. What we've done here is each feed has its own schedule. And when I say schedule, it doesn't actually sync on a particular time, but there's an interval. So each feed has an interval in which it will be synchronized. So let's say the feed interval is set to 1 hour. What happens in an hour from now, we will check again if something is new. But we will not actually check exactly in 1 hour from now, because that would get you to those spikes again. But we randomize the hour. So we take 10% of that 1 hour and add it to it. So a randomization between 10%. So you might actually see that the next hit is not 60 minutes later, but actually 66 minutes later, or anywhere between 60 and 66. And again, this is not synchronized on a particular minute interval, but it actually goes into seconds as well. So that's salting the schedule. Now, what happens if, for example, there is a problem on the server side? The server, for example, can't handle the requests right now, or there's some reconfiguration happening. Oftentimes, you're worried like, oh my God, if I'm now going to have run into one error, all these clients will start hitting me every couple of seconds in order to retry. And that's the worst thing that can happen is you're already having a problem, the server already has a problem, and you have all these clients trying to hit you again. So what we do here is we back off. The RSS platform sees, okay, there's an error. It's going to try in a fairly short interval again, but then the interval in which it will retry grows. So at some point, it will back off the entire way and will basically say, okay, I wasn't able to get here, there were some errors, I'm just going to go back to my regular sync interval. So if it was 1 hour, I'm going to go back to 1 hour. That basically assures that your server is not going to get hit with all these requests just because there was some error at some point in time. The other thing that a server can do, or as a feed publisher can do, is add the TTL tag into your feed. The way the RSS platform uses that TTL tag is saying if you put in the TTL tag of 1 hour, then the RSS platform will not hit you again in less than 1 hour. So the background sync engine will adhere to the TTL and say, like, okay, I was basically being told to back off a little. And for you as a feed publisher, if you know for the next hour I'm going to have problems, you can dynamically add a TTL for an hour and a half into every time you expose a feed. That way you know that everyone coming in with the RSS platform will not come back with that within that time frame that you specified. Another part is enclosure download. And so enclosures, you might have seen the Channel 9 videos on MSDN. Those can be fairly large. They are videos, and so they can become hundreds of megabytes or maybe even gigabytes. What can you do on the server as well as the client side that your bandwidth is not basically maxed out right away? So what we use in the RSS platform for download of enclosures is BITS, and BITS is the Background Intelligent Transfer Service. That's a part of Windows that's been shipping for many, many years, and that's exactly what Windows Update uses. And what it does basically in idle client bandwidth, it goes and trickles down files. So that's how you get your updates, your security updates, as well as that's what we use for enclosures. And the way that's implemented, it uses the HTTP range requests. So the client makes a hit to the server and says like, hey, please, of this file, of this URL, please give me the following 1,000 bytes in this range of the file. And so the server basically just responds with those bytes that are of interest that that client asked for. So what that gives you is a very, it smooths out bandwidth. You don't get the hit, you don't all of a sudden get somebody streaming a gigabyte of one file down, but actually over time it comes down. So that helps you on the client side as well as on the server side. I mentioned that I was going to talk about a little bit about security. RSS is fairly new. Having a platform in the OS is obviously a thing that where security needs to be, where you need to be mindful of security. And from the very beginning, given that we were part of the IE team, we obviously have a little bit of familiarity with security exploits and security issues in general. So from the very beginning, we started taking some of those principles that we've learned over the years, as well as taking the principles we've learned from email, what you basically need to be aware of, and applied them from the beginning into the design. So those are, don't trust the source. You can never, it's coming from the internet, can't trust the source. Even if I think I'm subscribed to Robert Scoble's feed, you know, I know Robert personally, I trust him, he's a good guy. You don't know, his site might be hacked and all of a sudden his source is no longer trustworthy. I do not know, so I can't trust it. Don't trust the content. Most of the times feeds are just HTTP, simple HTTP. Somebody might have tampered with it along the way. I think it's from Robert Scoble, but somebody else is injecting something. I can't trust the content that I'm getting. I can't trust the enclosures. Similar principle. It's just a file. I don't know what it is. On the client side, things that we've learned is whenever you put something in predictable locations, not a good idea. Somebody else can put something in that predictable location and some program unknowingly starts picking things up from that location, even though it was supposed to come from somewhere else. So that's why enclosures are downloaded into a non-predictable location. You have to come in through the API in order to access enclosures. And in general, we've applied several layers of defense in depth that we can go into a little bit more detail later or outside of this talk. This is getting too detailed for this talk, actually. But in general, it's one of those guiding principles. Don't just have one layer of defense. Don't just put up one fence. Actually have multiple ones. Because somehow, somewhere, sometime, somebody will find some way to get around one fence. And if you don't have a second, you're basically dead in the water right away. Specifically for RSS, what we've done is, as I mentioned before, the common feed list is an explicit subscription list. The user sees every subscription there is in the RSS platform. So the user, at any point in time, they're like, I don't like this feed anymore, they can unsubscribe. It is up to the user. There are no hidden feeds. So the way maybe you can think about the common feed list is the My Documents folder. The My Documents folder, the user sees what's in there. It's the user's data. It doesn't belong to an application. It belongs to the user. Another thing that we apply to the RSS platform is we are erring on the side of being strict. It's one of those principles. It's a V1 product, and we'd rather be strict in the beginning and become more laxed over time once we find out it's okay to be more lax. But it's worse than starting off of being very, very forgiving, and then we find out there's all these ways that can be used in bad ways, and then we have to tighten it up later. So one example of that is the RSS platform only accepts well-formed XML. If it's not well-formed XML, it's not accepted. So again, that's one of those things we're erring on the side of being more strict than lax. And overall, I think this will be good for the community in general. Less and less people will have to start writing their own custom parsers to handle feeds that are not in well-formed XML. Another thing that we've done is we actually, when the feed is downloaded, we validate it and sanitize it. What we mean by validating is we want to make sure is, okay, if it specifies itself as an Atom feed, that it really is an Atom feed, that it has the things that an Atom feed requires according to the spec. As well, what we do is we sanitize it. So we take out things that are supposed to be only text, we take out HTML out of it. If there is things inside HTML, active script, taken out. If there's object tags, taken out. And the reason why we do that is there's going to be a lot of applications that use the RSS platform in order to get to feed content, and they're going to start rendering it. And some of them might not be familiar with all the intricacies of how do you safely and securely actually host or display HTML with active content. What do you do with object tags? And all of a sudden, they're just like running any kind of object without being in a correct restricted zone, for example. So we just take all these things out. Again, we're erring here on the side of being strict. And maybe, if it turns out that the industry says that it needs to be more lax, we can do that in the future. But we start off with basically erring on the side of being strict. And last but not least is we're not allowing download of enclosures that are executables. So what we use here is in Windows, there's a service called the Attachment Execution Services. And what it does, it knows many, many different MIME types, which ones are actually executables, like screensavers, batch files, exes, CMD files, those kind of things. It's the same API that's being used by email applications, by instant messaging applications, in order to restrict what file types you can download from the internet. So now let me dig down a little bit deeper into the API. So this is what client-side developers would use. But even if you're not a client-side developer, this might still be interesting to you, is how easy it is to actually RSS enable an application. And the reason why it might be interesting for you is you will see the easier it is, the more and more applications will be there that consume different data type, that consume different data that comes down in a feed. So you as a feed publisher can see like, oh, okay, let me actually go in and publish different kinds of data. Let me add pictures, let me add audio, let me add calendar information, let me add contact information to a feed, because I know it is so simple to RSS enable applications out there. I know there will be applications consuming my feed because of that and making it better for my users and visualizing in a better way than just the pure text aggregated view of content. So what we have here is RSS, really, really simple. We have 4 main objects. Starts out with the feeds manager. That's basically the top object. From there, you can get to the root folder, and the way the common feed list is organized is a hierarchical. Think of it as similar to how favorites are. You have folders, and you can have favorites inside folders. So similar concept here. We have feed folders, and we have feeds. And each feed has a collection of items. So these are your regular RSS items, and each item can have an enclosure. There's 2 more objects there of interest. Those are for eventing. So whenever, for example, a new feed is added to the common feed list, an application can register for events to know like, oh, okay, there's a new feed, let me look at it if I actually want to display it, for example, or let me see if there's, if I'm a picture app, if there's any picture enclosures in there that I want to now show for the user. The API itself is a COM-based API. It comes in basically 2 flavors. So some of you might be familiar with COM-based programming and the concept of dual interfaces and those kind of things. What we've done is implemented what we call try interfaces. Not try because we're trying, but try as in 3. And what we mean by that is we have the set of dual interfaces, which are usually targeted towards automation. So that's script, managed code, and other those type of late-bound clients or applications. And then we have one set of interfaces targeted towards the C++ developers. There's still many, many software products out there that are just straight C++ native applications that want to consume this API. For example, Outlook 2007 is one of them, and others, including IE7. It's a straight C++ application, so it uses the early bound interfaces of the COM API. And also of note is, for anyone that thought about using the RSS platform inside their DHTML apps, it is not marked as safe for scripting. So by default, you cannot use it from your DHTML apps. And one of the reasons here is we did not want to expose, for example, the common feed list to just any random web page, because it's the user's data. It's private to the user. It shouldn't just be out there unless I choose to, my subscription list should not be out there freely accessible to any web page or being manipulative. We didn't want to have a random web page be able to add subscription to the feed list. Again, it's explicit feed list. The user is in control of the feed list. Here's a quick, it's probably hard to read, but this is just blown up individual object that I just talked about. There's properties and methods on each one of these objects. On the feed item object, for example, you see there's a lot of different properties that are part of a standard feed. So if you're an application developer, you don't even have to, for simple scenarios, you don't have to understand XML at all. You don't ever have to use an XPath query or any of those kind of things. You don't have to do any of the parsing. You can just use those properties. And you can just like, give me the item title, give me the item description, give me the pub date. Very easily accessible for applications, or give me the enclosure. Again, this is, you can look at the online documentation and see much more detail about this. But I just wanted to point out that it is, in simple scenarios, very easy to do. as well as on each item, as well as on each feed, there's the XML method. So you can get on an item, the XML fragment. If you choose to, you can then hand it off to your XML parser of your choosing and do XPath queries, etc., as well as on a feed. So you can consume an entire feed just based on the XML. Some people might already have all the XPath queries they want, or this is the way how you would access item extensions. Item extensions, things that the platform by itself does not know about. So, you define your own namespace, you define your own item extensions, you want to access them, you would go via the XML to do that. Also, for some people here of interest is managed code. Some people ask us, why is it a COM API? Shouldn't everything Microsoft be managed code? The answer here is there are many applications, as I mentioned before, that are C++ or native applications that are, or today don't have a dependency on the .NET framework and runtime. So those need to be able to access it. But what we've done while designing the object model and the API, we used the .NET Framework design guidelines in order to have a way how we design it, how we think about the API. So we applied those, except for small cases when the .NET Framework design guidelines basically did not apply into the world of COM. So the result of that is, or one example of that is actually, when you use interop from managed code, things like in COM iStream, which is just a regular stream, does not really get marshaled well into managed code, or does not really get marshaled well into script. So what we've done is, and this is where the two different interfaces, sets of interfaces come in, is we actually then use strings, for example. So in a JavaScript applet, you are much easier, or you can much easier deal with a string than somehow using a COM iStream object. The result of all of that is, with regard to managed code, is if you just do a import, a TLBM, the type library importer that ships with the .NET framework, the wrappers that get generated that you can use are actually fairly close to what you would expect a managed API to look like. It feels almost as a managed API. Not 100%, but it is fairly close because we applied the .NET Framework design guidelines. Let me now actually show you a simple demo of an application that I wrote to show you what you can do with all these kinds of things with the API. So let me just start off here, and this is something that you might have already seen before. On the MIX06 website, you can actually see your session calendar. So let me just log in here. And what you've seen, the session calendar is basically exposed as a feed, but there's the other part where you can actually define your own session calendar. And so if I go to my schedule here, as you can see, I've already picked a couple of interesting talks, a couple of from my fellow coworkers. And there is over here the personalized RSS feed. This has the feed just for me of the different sessions that I've chosen. So I click on that. As you can see here, I get the feed. I can have, there's list extensions enabled in here. I can sort by the speaker. I can filter. I can do the word wheel over here by just typing in a word. And I can subscribe to this feed. So basically, that way I will get new things and updated things. If I add a new session to my thing, it automatically comes down to my machine. Now, that by itself is interesting, useful, but let's take that a step further, because that doesn't really show yet that I've written any code. Let me show here Outlook. This is regular calendaring applications. For people that know Outlook, they're probably familiar with it. There's the concept of sub-calendars. So what you see here, this is the main calendar that you see right now. But then also here, I have a sub-calendar here. So I can show these side by side. This is a standard feature of Outlook. And I've written a little bit of glue code that I'm running right now. It's just a console app. It goes through all my subscriptions that I've subscribed to, and it picks up any feed that has certain item extensions in there. And those item extensions were specific to the session feed here. And what it's done is, it just takes all these items of these sessions and adds them here into my calendar. So as you can see, those are all the items that I've previously picked out as interesting things. And obviously over here is my own talk, because I want to make sure I actually show up for this. And now imagine I'm making a change. and I run this application again, or I run it on a schedule, or I listen to the events it automatically runs, it will update and it will keep my calendar up to date. I basically don't really have to do anything. And again, this was just written with a little bit of glue code that works on top of the object model of the RSS platform and using the automation interfaces that Outlook exposes. So this is a very nice way of how you can imagine any other kind of data type interacting with other applications that the users might already have. With a little bit of glue code, you can do that. Let me now actually show you just on the slides here how that was done. So the feed that I just subscribed to, the personalized schedule feed, has an extra namespace, what we call MS events, and has its URL with it. And inside each item, we pick up the title, description, GUID. That's a good way of identifying new items, as well as the MS events location. So this gets then it populates the location field inside an appointment in Outlook, as well as the session start time and end time. So again, you can see very, very simple additions or item extensions that were added to the feed, which then allow me to write the simple glue code in order to populate Outlook and keep it up to date whenever something changes. For example, the date and time would change for my talk. Automatically, my calendar would reflect that as well. So very, very simple. Imagine your kind of scenarios that you might want to enable to use those use existing applications with a little bit of glue code that can be done. Now, in the third section of this talk, and don't worry, there's only 4, and the fourth one is really short, I'm going to talk about, so I drilled down fairly deeply into the RSS platform. I showed you the API, I explained to you what the download engine does, etc. Now let me actually start stepping back and look at it from a higher level again. I'm going to talk about how applications can integrate with it, and actually how the RSS platform is part of the larger RSS ecosystem. So for an application to integrate, the way we see it happening is there's 3 main building blocks that applications might want to use in order to become RSS enabled. So one is the common feed list. I think that's a very obvious one. Applications and a lot of different people want to actually know, like, okay, what does the user subscribe to? What is their interest? I want to know they're subscribed to this feed. I want to add a new subscription because, let's say, I'm an application in which the user can subscribe to new feeds. So that's one building block. The other building block is, I'm an application, I really don't want to have to re-implement the building block of downloading feeds and items. Yes, it's supposed to be just as trivial HTTP GET with some XML parsing, but I think I've kind of hinted at it earlier. There's a little bit more to it in order to do it well. And so application might just want to rely on, okay, I just want to take the content that's come down, and I want to use it. I don't want to have to deal with actually getting it. And then the third part is a much tighter integration to actually use everything that's in the feed store and the enclosures that are being downloaded by the RSS platform, but also manipulate it. Maybe I'm a full-blown aggregator and I want to handle deleting of items. I want to handle read and unread state. I want to actually use enclosures and maybe manipulate them. Maybe I'm a Photoshop app, or I'm photo story that can go in and use multiple pictures and make a video out of them, those kind of things. So there's basically 3 big building blocks of the RSS platform that we envision applications mix and matching what they want to use in order to become RSS enabled. And then there's the other part of services. So the RSS platform by itself is on one PC, but you've already seen services out there in the world, and those are interested, and I'm going to get more into it, in the common feed list as well as read and unread state. So with that, let me actually transition to the RSS ecosystem. So the RSS platform that you see there on the left is one part of the bigger world out there. So you see the RSS platform there with the different applications on it. You see at the bottom again the different types of feeds. But there's other kinds of devices out there. There are other operating systems out there. There's a whole other slew of things, from mobile phones to media centers, et cetera, that aren't directly tied to the RSS platform. Yet there's also the other concept of roaming information, roaming your feed list between different computers. And what helps there are actually online services. There's various different RSS services out there And actually, one of them is Newsgator Online. And for that, I actually want to introduce the founder and CTO of Newsgator Online, Greg Reinecker. Come on up. Hello, Greg.
Hey, Walter.
How are you?
Good. Thanks, Walter. So what I'm going to walk you through today is kind of a day in the life of a person who might use some of these services and use IE7 to read subscription content. And it's actually more specifically maybe a day in the life of kind of an early adopter user, because out of 5 or so applications I'm going to be using today in my demo, 3 of them are in beta and 2 of them have actually never been demoed before this conference. So go to my screen, and the screen here is not working. Okay, so what we're looking at here is IE7. We've seen this before. So let's say in the morning, this is hard without the screen here. Let's say in the morning I get up and I wander over to my machine in my house running IE7, and I just kind of browse the net. And I stumble across this site called joelonsoftware.com. So let's say I find this site kind of interesting, and you know, I kind of want to subscribe to this feed so I can keep track of the updates. So I'm going to come over here like we've seen before, click on the subscribe button in IE7, and I can see the feed. So I can click this subscribe link actually to add it to my feed list. So I'll click subscribe, and we're actually going to see it show up here over on the left side, and I can actually read the content inside this feed. So pretty great, right? You know, automatic feed discovery. I can use the tools in IE7 to make this really easy and have a good user experience. So now, let's say on the way to the office, I stop by an internet cafe, I grab a cup of coffee, and I happen to notice a terminal sitting somewhere that I can use, but all I can do is really get on the web. It's not my computer. So I go to that terminal, I pull up a web browser, and I might go to Newsgator Online. I log in with my username and password that I have. And I can see the same feeds that I saw earlier in IE7. And specifically, I can see this Joel on Software feed that I added. And you can see actually there's no new items because I read them all this morning in IE7 before I left. So while I'm cruising around in my internet cafe here, I stumble across this great website, the Greg Reinecker's weblog website. It's actually my favorite site to demo with. I don't know why. And I find this site pretty interesting, so actually I want to subscribe to this. So I'm going to go on over to the feed, and I'll click the subscribe button in the feed there. And then I've got a little bit more time in the cafe here. So I'm actually going to click on this feed and read some of the articles that are in it. So right now there's 10 unread articles. I'm actually going to come in here and read some of these and mark them read. So I'll read that one and this one and maybe this one too. So if I look here, I'm down to 7 unread items in this new feed that I just added in the cafe. So now we'll move over to the Mac. So let's say when I get to the office, I have a Mac on my desk. And if I'm using a Mac, there's actually a pretty good chance I'm using NetNewsWire to read feeds on that Mac. So I'm going to pull up NetNewsWire. I'm going to click this refresh button. And what we're going to see is these 2 new feeds I've added this morning show up inside NetNewsWire. I can see the Joel on Software feed here. I can also see Greg's weblog. If I click on that, I can see that there's actually 7 unread items now, because I already read some of them this morning. So let's read a couple more of them now. So I read a couple of them, and now actually my kind of running out of time, right? Got to leave my desk, got to head out to lunch. So I'm down to 5 unread items, and now I'm out to lunch, and I'm using my mobile phone on the road. Try not to hit anything while I do it. So what we're looking at right here is a Trio 700 running Windows Mobile, and I'll zoom in on the screen. And we're actually running a copy of Newsgator Mobile on this phone. And we just fired up the application. So it's retrieving and synchronizing these feeds now. This is one of the apps that's never been demoed before, so cross your fingers. Okay, so application came up. I could see, actually, it's got all my feeds that I've been seeing earlier. It's got Greg's weblog with 5 unread items. It's got the Joel on Software feed that I added earlier. Let's actually go into Greg's weblog and read a couple of these. So we're already down to 5, because we've been reading these all morning. So I'm going to read this one. Oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. I'll read one more. Then I realize this is actually a little dangerous to be doing on the freeway. So I'm going to hit the sync button to basically synchronize all this stuff I've been doing back up to the server. So now I'll go back to the Windows machine here. And suppose that I get back to my desk after lunch, I grab my Windows laptop, and I head into a meeting. In that meeting, I got a little bit of extra time. I want to catch up on some of the news that I've been reading and some of the new content I have. So I might want to use FeedDemon, which is a great desktop application for reading feeds on Windows. So I fire this up. FeedDemon notices that there's been changes made since the last time it started up. So I'm going to say yes, sync those up. I see the 2 new feeds I've added show up. And I can actually see that Greg's weblog now has 3 unread items. I'll click on that and read one more of them. Then my boss notices I'm not paying much attention during the meeting, so I better turn this off. So, and then to complete the circle, we head back home. We get back to our IE7 machine late at night, cruising the net a little bit. And I'll click down here on the NewsGator icon and say synchronize. This would normally happen automatically. For the demo, we have manual sync turned on. It's a little non-deterministic exactly when the sync happens. But I can see over here on the feed list, I see Greg's weblog is actually shown up in the list. And there, it just turned bold, meaning there's some unread content there. If I click on my weblog, what I'm going to see is actually 2 unread items in this feed. So not the 10 we saw before, but just the 2 that I haven't read on any of these other applications that I've shown. So we've pretty much come full circle. We've subscribed to some content in IE7. We've read it using a whole bunch of other devices off-box. And we've come all the way back to IE7 and read some more stuff there. So really what we're kind of doing here is taking the great experience inside of IE7 or inside of Vista for RSS, for auto discovery, easy subscription, that kind of thing, and really extending it beyond the box. So onto your other PCs or your Mac or your mobile device or your media center or any third-party application that happens to use our APIs. And the other great thing is, too, is that if you want to sync with the NewsGator platform now, it doesn't just have to be using our API. Someone can actually write to the RSS platform API, and then we can synchronize that using the code that we have.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So just to basically wrap up, there's a couple of calls to actions that we have here. I think you've heard it through and through the entire 3 days now. RSS enable your site. There's many things you can do today. Add an RSS feed if you don't already have one. Do feed discovery. Use the simple list extensions when appropriate. You implement lists if you want to, and if your feeds are of that type. Follow the RSS best practices. Add the GUID tags, et cetera, that I mentioned before. Support HTTP ranges for enclosure download. That helps the client as well as the server side. Think about what more to emit in a feed than just text, blogs, or news, but actually think about what data types you want in item extensions or as enclosures. Think about, if you're a publisher, there's going to be all these RSS-enabled applications. How can you, as a publisher, RSS publisher, target those applications? What is it that you can basically give to your users so they can experience your feed in a much richer way? And participate in the RSS ecosystem that we've just shown. It's just beyond than just one PC. It's a much larger ecosystem. And last but not least, please go online and fill out these session eval forms. As one of those things, we want to get the feedback. We're here to listen as well, not just to talk. And with that, if there's any information that you're looking out for or you're looking for, look at the RSS blog, the team blog that we have. Look at the MSDN documentation for the RSS platform. There's a hands-on lab that you can go through that teaches you and goes through all these things that I've shown before. You can actually try it out and see how it works. And there's a link to the NewsGator API as well. And with that, if there's any questions, feel free to ask now, or we're also going to be here off to the side a little bit later if you want to ask questions more in person. So I think we have a couple questions. Great.
Yeah, in the example, the NewsGator example, you obviously showed how to use the read unread state to kind of synchronize with new items coming in and so forth and what had been read. Can developers use that state just to send data back to the provider to gauge popularity of articles and things like that to see what people are reading and what they're not reading? So some analytics can be built around the RSS feed to say, okay, these are our most popular articles based on who's subscribing to our feed.
So I think the first part, I would argue yes. So the first part is, yes, the RSS platform exposes read and unread state on a particular item. So you can write an application on the client side that sets those states. And then I think it hands over to what a service like NewsGator Online can do with that information when it's synced up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the information would be there to be able to do that. So you could track read and unread changes and either send them out through a service like NewsGator Online or write some code to be able to send that information wherever you want to.
If the person is just reading it in IE7, though, is that possible to send it back to the provider just by virtue of them reading it in IE7?
So if there is basically the plugin that NewsGator has written, which sends it to the service. So that was written by NewsGator, and that listens to events on the RSS platform itself, and it does the upload. By just the RSS platform itself, there is no plugin. So information is not sent anywhere. Right now, the information just stays on the local client's machine. If the client chooses to install something in order to send that information somewhere else, that is possible.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about cache management? Really from two aspects. One is if you have two users on the machine and you're downloading enclosures from the same feeds, are you going to have duplicates? Also, if you have very large media feeds, do you do anything to start to make sure that the feed doesn't overwhelm the disk drive?
So number one was, what are we doing with regards to cache management? So if there's multiple users on the same machine, we are treating everyone as an individual, meaning one user does not know about the content of the other user. And so what will happen is that if I'm subscribed to the same feed, with two users subscribed to the same feed, it will be downloaded twice. There's basically two instances of the download engine running, downloading it. Same thing happens to enclosures. So if the user is subscribed to the same feed with enclosures, and the enclosures are set by default, it's not set to automatically download enclosures, but if the user turns enclosure download on a particular feed, it will happen that there will be duplicate copies on the machine. One of the reasons is privacy. I should not know as one user if another user is subscribed to it or not. And the other part is the V1 of a product. So any of those smarts of saying there's a centralized service that basically makes sure things are only being downloaded once, et cetera, that is not implemented in the RSS platform as you see today. I think those were both questions answered, right? Oh, cache size, sorry. For enclosures, so in general, the user can set the number of items that are kept on a feed. By default, that is 200 items. And as soon as something hits over 200 items, we start purging items that are oldest. So by that, also enclosures will be purged as well. So as a user, I can say, okay, I don't want to overload my hard drive. I will set my number of items I want to keep to, let's say, 10. So thereby, implicitly, I can control how many items or how many enclosures I have on my hard drive. It's a very good question. Yes, please.
Yeah, it looks like, again, with these extensions, you guys have done a fantastic job about the consumption, of the RSS feeds. But again, looking at your best practices and some of the work we've done trying to support the list extensions, do you know if anyone, either on your team or the ASP.NET team, has done anything around the creation, of the feeds for their consumption, maybe even using the same object model, as your API to create those with the enclosures to be well-formed to support the list extensions?
So as of today, I do not know a specific answer to that, but obviously that's a question that we're getting, and that is something we will address in the future. So I think the best place is to either look on our team blog as we have something to announce or state there, and ideas and best practices or even samples that might become there, as well as the ASP.NET sites.
Hi. My first question was the same as the previous, was how to expose RSS feeds that support SLA, but I have an alternate one. Actually, yeah, I understand that not all applications are based on .NET, not all applications are managed code, but why don't you provide directly managed wrappers for your APIs?
That was one of the things that we want to do in the future. It is whenever you ship software, you have to choose your primary scenarios and your primary things that you want to ship in a certain amount of time that you have. So you will basically today, because TLBM works fairly well, we are not shipping a primary interop assembly. That's basically what you're asking for. Why is there not a PIA? It's basically one of the things that when you need to ship, you choose what you basically ship with, but you can imagine that as something going forward that we're definitely looking at to provide.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that there's a lot of people going out and providing RSS feeds today, and it's almost getting to the point where the signal-to-noise ratio is getting a little out of hand. And I see that we have a way to now subscribe to them centrally in the OS. What I'm looking for is more of a management sort of thing to help people manage the feeds they've got, to expire ones they're not interested anymore, and maybe figure out what are the ones that are most popular to me, or maybe change scheduling or things like that. I'm wondering what you guys can do so I could help my mom benefit from RSS.
So in the RSS platform, as well as the IE7 itself, I mean, the user in IE7 sees all the feeds that they're subscribed to, but it's basically just a list or a tree view of them. Because it has the accessible to any application, the API in order to manage that, my answer would be, I hope there will be applications that actually do provide that additional functionality for users. So in V1 of the product, none of that is in there. But I think that's a great opportunity for anyone that writes application to be like, okay, let me actually try out what are some of the things of expiring. Do I go by when's the last time the user has marked an item as read or unread, or what is the frequency with which they want to actually look at these feeds, kind of thing. So those are all things that we don't have any concrete answers to. I think as a community, we don't really have an answer to yet what we should do. How does the management get easier for a mainstream common user in that sense? So we're hoping the RSS platform actually enables people to now write those applications. Before, they would have to write them specifically for one particular aggregator, and using maybe some aggregators have APIs or not, or directly work with their store. So we're hoping that the API makes it much easier to actually write such an application.
So that's for Mr. Guy next to you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as an example, two of our applications, FeedDemon and NetNewsWire specifically, both expose the kind of information you're talking about. So we could show you, which feeds you seem to pay the most attention to. We can help you find new feeds, et cetera.
Just, a lot of our corporate customers are going to be a little hesitant to upgrade to IE7 quickly, especially with the a lot of the press about how it's tightened up some of the standards, and it's going to change the way a lot of their internal applications are rendered. And in addition, we also have a lot of users who use like Firefox and stuff internally. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you see where this is going, but is there any opportunity here to break the RSS API out of IE7, or are they just very tightly coupled? No, it's actually the RSS API is completely independent. IE7 is just like any other application using the RSS platform. So IE7 has no particular knowledge than the public APIs that we've documented. So Firefox or any other browser can add subscriptions, delete subscriptions, can do everything that IE7 can do. There's no additional knowledge necessary. So today you can just sit down and recreate what IE7 has done, just purely based on the RSS APIs. So the RSS APIs are available outside of IE7?
It ships with IE7. So the ship delivery vehicles, basically, if you go into Windows Vista or whenever IE7 is installed, the APIs are available. There is no separate redistributable of the RSS platform.
Yeah, because I think that's going to be the issue, at least for us, that telling them they have to install a new browser to get the RSS stuff might be a problem.
Okay, that's good feedback. Go ahead.
Are there any plans to take this to the enterprise onto a server platform to have so you could, with the enterprise, so if you have a corporate environment where you have multiple people and a common feed list in any way?
So for the RSS platform itself, it is targeted towards the client. It is not a server platform. It wasn't designed to be a server platform. There are possibly other products out there that target more the enterprise in that regard.
Right. So an example of that would be NewsGator Enterprise Server, which is designed exactly for what you're talking about. And then what I showed earlier about the IE7 and RSS platform integration with the client will be modified to work with NewsGator Enterprise Server. So basically, we could take the enterprise experience, extend that down to the desktop, and make it all work together as you would hope.
Hi, you haven't talked about authentication. Do you support authenticated feeds? And if yes, what kind of security issues that?
So the version 1 of the RSS platform does not support authenticated feeds. So it does support HTTPS, but not authentication. So that is something that we're looking forward to, obviously, in a future release of the platform.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think I see one more.
I just wanted to second the delivery outside of IE7. All of our customers are still barely getting off 2000 and up to XP. We had some pharmaceutical customers that are on Office 97, thinking about upgrading to something. So it would be good if we want to embrace RSS, which we do for alerting and stuff in our platform. XP would be a great, a separate bundle to send it out on there.
This is excellent feedback. Also, use the feedback channel that we have via the team or RSS Teams blog to basically voice those kind of things because we need to hear from you what you need. We can't anticipate everything, and we don't claim to know all the answers. So this is very good to hear. Any other questions? Great. Thanks, everyone, for getting up on the third day of the conference for an 8:30 a.m. talk. Thank you very much.